President, please.
Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Finance, Mr. Tan Murkarakan, His Hoogcontein, our Chairman for SMU, His Excellency Yuan Jielong, China's Ambassador to Singapore, our keynote speaker, Professor Justin Lin, and all the panel members, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side, a very warm welcome and a good morning here to our inaugural China Forum. We're all aware that China's emergence as a political heavyweight and an economic superpower has, for us here in Singapore and in the region, far-reaching implications. We all know that China is a country with a very long history and many different phases, and changes currently in China are taking place at a great speed. In fact, I don't dare to say that we planned this forum to be just after the third plenary, but it's a nice coincidence, I think. So I could pretend that I have had some inside information for planning this forum, but I wouldn't go that far. But we see that the new leadership in China is faced with a myriad of complex challenges: rapid urbanization, maintaining social stability, strengthening the social safety net, narrowing the income gap, an aging population, and so on and so forth. It is against this backdrop that we organize this SMU China Forum, to provide our friends, business leaders, entrepreneurs, policymakers and researchers with a much more comprehensive and integrated understanding of some of the trends that are shaping China's growth and development. It aims to enable our participants of this forum, as the team suggests, to be China ready by coming together to share, discuss and debate ideas and issues about China that are current and relevant. It is with this objective in mind that we have today what I think is a stellar lineup of scholars and thought leaders who will share with us their valuable insights on various aspects of China. They have been mentioned before and they will be introduced later on, but I want in particular to welcome Professor Justin Lin from Peking University, who was also formerly the Senior Vice President and Chief Economist of the World Bank. The topics that will be discussed today will range from factors that have contributed to China's extraordinary growth, potential challenges and opportunities arising from its demographic trends, its household income and consumption, social investment, and a topic that is also important to Singapore, aging. This forum is an integral part of our China Initiative, which was established in the second quarter of 2012. The SMU China Initiatives aims to raise our profile as a university in China, as a research university, in what I would call the broad field of social sciences. By doing so, we want to contribute to the collaboration between Singapore and China in business, government, and civic society by nurturing China-ready and bicultural graduates who are able to function effectively in the business and financial environment in China. We do so by providing many more opportunities for exchange for our students and internships. And we also seek to actively drive and strengthen our collaboration with existing and new partner universities in research and postgraduate education. We want to play a key role in creating and sharing knowledge and thought leadership that will benefit both Singapore and hopefully also China. Our strategy that we decided upon on the initiative of the Board of Trustees consists of 4 priorities. First, and as I mentioned already, we want to raise the profile and the reputation of SMU in China. It's part of our overall strategy to build the SMU brand and image internationally. We have already strong collaborations in Europe and in the United States. I remind you that we were created in collaboration with the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, but have now started moving into China, into India, and also our first steps, I would say, into our neighboring countries in ASEAN. But in fact, this is not completely new. SMU started its engagement with China back in 2007, when our Li Kongqiang School of Business began collaborating with Xiamen University on a Master's of Applied Finance for Chinese students. But by raising our profile in China, SMU hopes to continue to attract high-quality Chinese faculty and postgraduate students to undertake teaching, research, and learning in the holistic environment at SMU. The second aim we have is to improve the quality of the students that are admitted from China into our undergraduate, postgraduate and executive programs. Our third aim is to broaden the engagement between SMU faculty members and their counterparts at leading Chinese universities through joint research and PhD co-supervision. This is part of our strategic goal of developing SMU as an Asian knowledge hub. Our emphasis is on generating rigorous, high-impact, cross-disciplinary research that addresses Asian issues of global relevance, and SMU is therefore constantly looking for opportunities to deepen the creation and transmission of knowledge by working with like-minded partners, including our counterparts in China. I'm sure that the unique insights of China generated from this research, from this collaborative research, will be useful to our students, the academia, governments, and the business world here in Singapore. Now, beyond raising our profile, beyond attracting better quality students, and beyond doing more research in a collaborative way with our partners in China, our fourth priority is to enhance student exchange programs and internships in China for our students. At SMU, one of the ways we promote multicultural learning is by giving our students global exposure. We're convinced that this will help our students' view of the world, broaden our students' view of the world, and develop their cross-cultural knowledge and competencies, which are critical in the world we live in. As many of you may know, our aim is to have 100% of our students experience some form of global exposure. In 2011 to 2012, we registered a 77% participation rate of our students in this global exposure, which has seen an increase to 84% for this year's graduating cohort. At the same time, we are happy to have hosted the largest number of international exchange students, 834 students from 160 university partners spanning 43 countries. I felt as a president that we were a little bit underrepresented in China. The economy of China is important to us. We want our students to know more about China. And China has a number of very strong and leading universities and numerous world-renowned companies. And being able to have those exchanges and those internships will be invaluable in enhancing our students' learning experience. To date, SMU has collaborations with leading Chinese institutions across research, as I said, undergraduate programs, postgraduate programs, and training and development. Let me first focus for a minute or two on research. In research, the 6 schools at SMU have already published research papers on China and also collaborating with Chinese universities. To give you an idea of the varied research work done at SMU, let me give you a few examples. Our School of Accountancy has a focus in its research on corporate governance, whilst our Li Gongqiang School of Business has done a fair bit of research on corporate philanthropy and finance in China. Our School of Law is undertaking research on the World Trade Organization and business laws in China. And at the same time, our School of Economics is focusing on innovation, health and labor issues in China. In addition, the School of Information Systems is working on research in social media and big data transfer, while the School of Social Sciences is conducting a wide range of research activities on social development and China's international relations. For example, SMU School of Social Sciences is working with Fudan's University's State Innovative Institute for Public Management and Public Policy Studies to set up a joint research center on development studies. The center will conduct research on issues related to social development in China, including rural reforms, land policy, urbanization, migration, and aging. This is actually our first joint research center with the university in China. SMU School of Information Systems has set up a research lab with Ping An Banking and Insurance Group to promote research, application, and technology transfer of big data. This is the first research partnership between SMU and a major Chinese corporation. Our School of Information Systems will utilize its deep expertise in analytics, data analysis, and data mining to provide a range of business solutions to Ping An. These include analyzing user behavior based on large-scale social media data and establishing a customized information extraction and filtering system for better and timely social information tracking filtering and responding. Our faculty from the Li Kongqiang School of Business has published a number of papers on China's innovation landscape, its innovation capacity, intellectual property rights and patenting strategies. And also they have been working on corporate social responsibility in China. In undergraduate programs, which is the second point, we want to provide SMU students with opportunities to network with some of the best brains in China and to be China ready, like in the team for today. To do this, SMU has inked new student exchange MOUs with top Chinese universities including Tsinghua University, Peking University, Fudan University, Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and Southwest University of Finance and Economics in Chengdu. In addition, SMU is working with a number of major corporations in different Chinese cities to provide our students with structured internships, whilst the students are on exchange in China. We want to make sure that our exchange programs are attractive and enriching and encourage our students to opt for Chinese universities for an exchange, since this is coupled with these internship opportunities. In postgraduate programs, our School of Information Systems has signed a double master's agreement with Peking University's School of Software and Microelectronics in June 2013, where students graduate with a Peking University master's degree and an SMU Master's in Information Technology and Banking master's degree. The program welcomed its first batch of 28 students in September this year. We also tied up with Xiamen University, in particular our School of Economics, Huazhong University of Science and Technology, and Southwest University of Finance and Economics for its Masters of Science in Financial Economics program. And last month, I was happy to lead a delegation to meet up with Vice Minister of China's Ministry of Education and Chairman of China Scholarship Council, Mr. Hao Ping, to discuss collaboration in PhD programs. And SMU is proud that we have been included into the China Scholarships Council's list of partners. That means that our university will be providing scholarships to high-quality PhD candidates from China to undergo PhD co-supervision programs at SMU and to pursue SMU PhD programs. In the training and development, executive education, our Center for Professional Studies and the Chinese Chamber, the Singapore Chinese Chamber Institute of Business signed an MOU to leverage on the strengths of both parties to organize training and networking programs for government officials and business executives from China. At the same time, we are collaborating with Sichuan Administration Institute for Training and Research Partnerships. And just last week, I was in Hangzhou together with my colleagues, where the SMU's Business Families Institute signed an agreement with Zhejiang Family Business Center to undertake research aimed at helping Chinese families look at succession planning. We are currently also in discussion with several Chinese universities who have expressed interest in training programs, which includes commodities training, shipping business, and trade finance offered by our Financial Training Institute and our International Training Institute. But the picture at SMU would not be complete if we would not talk about our students and what they do in community outreach. It's not only about education, exchange, research, which are very important for a university as ours, but our students have also to build up their value systems. And as you know, our students are encouraged to take, not only to do internships, but also to undertake community outreach projects and they do this on an international scale. The purpose is to develop that value system and deliver a holistic undergraduate educational experience. And for the past 5 years, SMU students have been involved in several community service projects in China. These include our undergraduates sharing with underprivileged students the basic business, innovation and accounting skills. And SMU students have also reached out to a number of primary schools in rural China to develop confidence in the children, acquaint them with the arts, and introduce them to other enrichment activities. Since 2011, SMU has sent students on cultural exchanges to the city of Kashgar in China's Xinjiang province. Our students have set up 3 cultural centers to help preserve the ethnic cultures there and also help trainee teachers in Kashgar on their conversational English. In August this year, during Prime Minister Li Hsien-loong's visit to China, SMU and Kashgar's Teachers College agreed to co-organize an annual English Festival to promote international exchange and to cultivate conversational English ability to the students of the Kashgar Teachers College. And I have to say that more than 150 of our students over the years have been involved in these activities in Kashgar. What I have just shared, and probably far too fast, but demonstrates a commitment of SMU to broaden and deepen our ties with China, to encompass more areas of collaboration as we have developed new strengths in research and education. We believe this will help contribute to knowledge creation and talent development for both Singapore and China. Today's forum is the first of what we hope will be of many to be organized in the years to come. We plan to have such an annual gathering of minds, alternating between Singapore and China, and to discuss topical issues about China which are of interest and relevance. We hope that by working with our academic and corporate partners through the China Forum, research collaboration, exchange programs, as well as training and development, SMU will be able to develop the linkages, expertise and knowledge on China and Asia so that we become a partner of first choice for universities, institutions and business. On behalf of SMU, I also would like to thank our guest of honor, DPN Tharman Shanmugaratnam and Professor Justin Lin for taking the time from their very busy schedules to join us this morning in their strong support of these efforts of SMU in China. And it's now my privilege to invite our guest of honor, Deputy Prime Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam, to share with us his thoughts and observations on China. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me. Chairman of SMU, Professor Arnold de Meyer, President SMU, His Excellency Tuan General, Ambassador to Singapore, Mr. Justin Fu, our distinguished speaker, and the reason why I'm here today to listen to you. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you at this inaugural SMU forum, as well as the very excellent choice of speaker for this inaugural forum, Justin Lin. 各位来宾朋友们，大家早上好。I was very interested to listen to Professor Arnold de Meyer's explanation of SMU strategy in China. I think it is a far-sighted strategy, and you're going about it with great energy and a little bit of entrepreneurial zeal as well. So I congratulate you, and I think this forum is just an example of that broader strategy that you're taking. And congratulations too for the brilliant timing of this forum. I will just say a few things before passing the floor to Justin Lin. I think in reading the commentaries and analyses of China these days, one is still struck by the wide divergence of views, particularly in the West, on China's prospects, short-term as well as long-term. I think there is, it fascinates me how the hard landing camp still survives and still has a lot of attraction in many circles. And in my opinion, the hard landing camp will eventually come to a hard landing. There is some confusion between the short-term challenges that China faces as a result of the imbalances and excesses of the past and the longer-term potential of its economy. And let me start by just saying a few words about its longer-term potential. First, there is no doubt that China is decelerating, and the main reason for that has to do with its demographics. The labor force is not just slowing in its growth, it appears to be in fact turning such that it has peaked in size, and certainly the number of young people entering the labor force is already beginning to decline. So labor force growth is no longer going to be a source of growth for the Chinese economy. This is a somewhat unique situation because if you compare China with countries like Japan or Korea,
at an equivalent stage of development, equivalent level of per capita income, or equivalent level of productivity. Japan and Korea sustained significant labor force growth for 25 to 30 years after that stage. But China is already at the stage where it has exhausted its potential for labor force growth, and it may in fact turn negative. However, economic growth comprises labor force growth and productivity growth. And whilst China faces a disadvantage compared to that historical trajectory seen in Japan and Korea, it still has significant upside in productivity growth, even compared to Japan and Korea, which were stellar examples of productivity growth over the last several decades. It is hard to be too precise about comparing countries when it comes to productivity growth, and particularly comparing a continental scale economy like China with Korea and Japan, which are not small countries but still far smaller than China. But roughly speaking, I think it is known that the level of productivity in China today is roughly equal to what it was in Japan in the early 60s and equal to what it was in Korea in the early 80s. And Japan and Korea, starting from those 2 points, had achieved productivity growth of something like 6 to 7% for the 10 years after. China, I believe, has more potential than that, and there are a few reasons for this. First, China is a much larger and more diverse economy than Japan and Korea were. The diversity is not just geographical, but it's a diversity even in comparative advantage within that continental scale economy. And if you look at provinces like Sichuan today, Sichuan province, which is not the most backward inland province by any means, but Sichuan province has something like half the level of productivity of Zhejiang province and about 2/3 of the national average. So that tells you about what can happen as you get convergence within China. Convergence within China. That is a first reason why China still has very significant growth potential in productivity as we go forward. And the connectivity between the regions in China, northeast, inland, western provinces connected to the coastal provinces, that connectivity alone is spurring not just investment opportunity and opportunities to boost demand through investment, it is more importantly spurring the convergence of productivity that is still a historical trend. The second reason why China has, I think, more upside potential is in urbanization. And this part is well known. China is less urbanized today than Japan and Korea were at that comparative stage of history. And the levels of productivity again in the rural areas are a small fraction of what they are in the urban areas. There's tremendous potential to raise rural productivity as well as to achieve overall increases in productivity through a shift of labor and other resources from the rural areas into the urban areas. A third reason why China has upside potential is its past negatives, the past legacy of central planning, which is still with China. The inefficiencies in the Chinese system, its financial system, whole system of allocating resources are much larger than they were in Korea and Japan. So there's tremendous scope left to improve the returns of investment, to improve the efficiency of investment, to improve the returns for households as well. Tremendous scope left. And this is the third reason why I believe there's significant upside for China. And the fourth reason is what's happening internationally. I think the opportunities for convergence through the use of technology is now even greater than it was 30 or 40 years ago. The way in which IT and other intelligent technologies, Professor Dimea mentioned big data for instance, the opportunities have extended well beyond commoditized manufacturing to even knowledge-based services. The opportunities to have distributed value chains globally in the services economy are already there. And China, I believe, will be able to exploit its comparative advantage and to achieve convergence with world leaders, not just in manufacturing, but in services going forward. So those are 4 reasons for significant upside. But we all know that these merely indicate a country's potential growth rate and not its actual growth rate. And most countries have not exploited their potential. In fact, convergence is still a rare phenomenon in economic history. And very few developing countries have first made it to middle income status and more importantly have broken through to upper middle income or upper income status. Very few countries have achieved that since a group of European countries achieved it in an earlier era. Very few other countries have achieved it. In Asia, we've had, after Japan, you've had the 4 NIEs, but otherwise, convergence remains a story that has yet to be written, and China intends to write that story. However, it is not preordained, it is not automatic. It will not happen without deep and far-ranging reforms in any country that intends to achieve convergence, and particularly for a country like China that intends to move beyond middle income status. The nature of the reforms required is much deeper than that required to escape poverty and move to the middle income status. Now there are 2 reasons why there's risk involved in China's outlook. And there's risk involved in whether China will achieve that full potential that we talk about. The first reason is a very important one, which is that in the short to medium term, China is not merely embarking upon a process of re-gearing its economy and moving from investment to consumption. It is also dealing, first and foremost, with the excesses of the previous stimulus package that was adopted during the world financial crisis, and the imbalances and excesses, excess capacity, significant excess capacity in some sectors, coupled with significant inflationary pressures in others. Those imbalances are still with China. So China is now having to deal with overlapping challenges. The need to re-gear its economy and move to a new structural setting for its economy for the long term, but at the same time having to absorb and mitigate the excesses of the past stimulus package that was implemented. And the Chinese leadership is very clear about the nature of these overlapping challenges and the fact that the combination of those 2 challenges probably means having to take some short-term pain in order to achieve long-term gain. And they're very clear that it is better not to postpone this short-term pain. The short-term pain involved in putting in place structural reforms, as well as the short-term pain involved in reining in excess credit and addressing the excesses due to the past stimulus package. So that's a first complexity, the short to medium-term challenges of implementing reform at a time when you're still trying to address the excesses of the past stimulus package. The second major complexity has to do with the interdependence between the reforms that are being embarked upon. And we saw the breadth and depth of reforms that China intends to embark on in the communique issued yesterday after the 3rd plenary. Much of the plans will be spelled out, of course, in the coming months. But this is not just another set of reforms. This is a new phase of transformation in China as an economy and as a society. But it is not just one reform or independent reforms, each of which have to be proceeded with vigor. It is about interdependent reforms, intrinsically. Because it is not possible, for example, to have financial sector reform without SOE reform, without state enterprise sector reform. It is not possible to have successful urbanization without reform to the household registration system progressively. It is not possible to have successful urbanization without land reform in the rural areas that will free up labor and encourage rural-urban migration. So this is a very complex set of reforms. Whichever reform you look at, it cannot be undertaken independently, but has to be undertaken together with other complementary reforms. And this introduces great complexity, because each reform carries risks, economic, social, sometimes political. And the interdependence of reforms does not neutralize those risks, it sometimes compounds those risks. And this is why I think the communique, which I read carefully late last night, concluded that China has to take a pragmatic approach of crossing the river by feeling the stones. I think we all have a stake in China's successful transformation, successful implementation of this complex set of reforms. And we must all recognize that this is the most complex structural reform task that any country has faced in the last 50 years. This is the most complex structural challenge of any country in the last 50 years. China is embarking it with a forward-looking attitude. It recognizes the complexity, but it is not going to be without risks. So it would be naive to think that this is going to be a riskless process. I should say that when I say we all have a stake, it is first because, obvious, China is the major source of economic growth in the world today. Second, because I think we all have a stake in China moving up the value chain as it plans to do. As Justin Lin's latest book explains in some detail, China has adopted a model that has some resemblance to what some other economies have done in the past, particularly the Asian NIEs in Japan, of dynamic structural change. In other words, it was not inward-looking, it was outward-looking, and its growth can only be explained by its outward-looking nature in the last 30 years. It identified its comparative advantage, but it was not a fixed comparative advantage for all time. It kept evolving, kept learning, kept moving up in the ladder of comparative advantage. And Professor Justin Lin uses the well-known paradigm of flying geese. I think in the original Japanese version it was flying wild geese, to explain this phenomenon in which some emerging economies have in fact managed to grow rapidly by complementing each other, exploiting each other's comparative advantage, and having technology, skills, and experience flow from one country to another. I would just like to add that I think China is not just a very large flying geese in this pattern. It also has its own internal pattern of flying geese, because China is a continental scale economy, and inland provinces and cities, selected provinces and cities in the northeast, are themselves part of a pattern of comparative advantage within China. So whilst you face extreme labor shortages in the coastal regions and rapidly rising wages, and whilst you're seeing the coastal provinces moving up towards more skill and technology-intensive activities, there's still ample potential left in China's inland provinces and the northeast for forms of manufacturing and even services activity that are quite different from what is being done in the coast. So China is not just exporting labor-intensive activities to Bangladesh and Southeast Asia and other places. It is also broadening that pattern of flying wild geese within its continental scale economy. And we all have an interest in this continuum. It stimulates global demand, and very importantly, I think it offers an opportunity for the lower skill and lower productivity economies to get into that act and to be part of the flying geese pattern, and an opportunity to spur on the middle income economies in Asia. We all have an opportunity to take advantage of the increasing demand for sophisticated products in China coming out of middle class consumption. And we all have an opportunity to see Asia integrate further in the coming decade. Integrate further whilst the rest of the world doesn't provide a significant stimulus to global growth. Integrate further in Asia so as to maximize our complementarity, ensure that we all plug into the opportunities in China, and ensure that this pattern of wild flying geese continues to be a plus and a win-win for all Asian economies in the years to come. So I just want to end on that note. I'm basically optimistic. There's risks involved in China's reform package. It will have to go about it carefully and with the pragmatism that it has shown so far. But this is an economy with tremendous potential left, both not just going by historical experience of other countries, but going by its own inherent potential to remove inefficiency and move to a more efficient platform for growth. And it will be an economy with plenty of opportunity for the rest of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vivian. It gives me great pleasure now to invite Professor Justin Lin, former Senior Vice President and Chief Economist at the World Bank, Honorary Dean and Professor at the National School of Development, Peking University, China. Professor Justin Lin, please.
His Excellency Deputy Prime Minister Sammugaratnam, President Mian Demel, and Chairman Ho, and Ambassador Duan. Sorry, I was a little bit, tired. Okay, it's quite an honor for me to attend this inauguration of China Forum and then to discuss with you a new book of mine, Demystifying the Chinese Economy. The rise of China from poverty to prosperity is one of the most important economic events in modern history. When China started a journey to transit from a planned economy to a market economy, the per capita income in China was only $154 US, and it was less than 1/3 of the average in sub-Saharan African countries. But in the past 34 years, the average annual growth rate in China was 9.8% per year. And now China became one of the high middle income countries, and the economic size is the second largest in the world. And during this period of time, China also opened its economy, and the trade in China grew at 16.6% per year. And now China became the largest exporter in the world and the second largest trading nation in the world. And during this period of time, 680 million people get out of poverty. And China also contributed to the global economy as demonstrated in its contribution to the East Asian financial crisis in 1980 and the recent global financial crisis that started in 2008. But in the past 35 years, internationally, there's a lot of prediction about the coming collapse of the Chinese economy. So in this talk, I'd like to discuss with you with 6 questions. The first one, how come it was possible for China to achieve such a high rate of growth in the past 34 years? And the second question I'd like to discuss was, how come it was impossible for China to achieve similar growth rate in the past before the transition in 1978? If the transition to a market economy was the main reason for the success of China, how come other countries also engaged transition in a similar period of time, but how come they could not have similar growth rate? And the fourth question I'd like to analyze is what kind of prices that China paid for such a remarkable growth. And the fifth question is that, can China sustain this growth rate in the coming years? And the last question, whether other developing countries can have a similar performance as China in the past 3 decades. For the first question, how come it was possible for China to have only average close to 10% growth rate for 30 years and more? We know that high economic growth rate is a modern phenomenon. Before the 18th century, even for the high advanced country at that time, that's Western European country, their average annual growth rate, according to historians, was only 0.05% per year. That means it took 1,400 years for them to double their income. And from the 18th century to mid-19th century, the average annual growth rate jumped 20 times to 1% per year. And it took 70 years for them to double their income. And from the mid-19th century to now, the average annual growth rate of per capita income in high-income country was about 2% per year. And it took 35 years to double their per capita income. And what made that possible? To reduce from 1,400 years to double per capita income, down to 70 years, and now to 35 years in high-income country. We know it was because of the Industrial Revolution that occurred in the late 18th century. And the Industrial Revolution accelerated the technological innovation and the industrial upgrading, and those kind of changes made continuous acceleration in the increase of labor productivity possible, and that is the foundation of high economic growth rate in any countries. But if technological innovation and industrial upgrading are the mechanism for economic growth, and in developing country, there is some kind of advantages, because for the high-income country, their technological innovation and industrial upgrading are only global frontiers, and they need to invent new technology and new industries. But for a developing country, their technological innovation and industrial upgrading move within the global frontiers, so they can imitate, they can borrow the technology, the industries, as a way of technological innovation and industrial upgrading. And this mechanism will reduce the cost and the risk of technological innovation and industrial upgrading. And if they can tap into the potential, certainly the rate of growth in a developing country can be higher than in high-income country. And the empirical evidence show, since the Second World War, there were 13 economies in the world. They tapped into the advantage of backwardness and accelerated their growth. And certain economy, use the potential, and they achieved 7% or more growth rate continuously for 25 and more years. And China became one of those 13 economies since China started transition from an economy to a market economy in 1979. So the answer for the first question is simple. Utilizing the potential advantage of backwardness to accelerate the technological innovation and the industrial upgrade. But the advantage of backwardness is the secret for the success since 1979. We know that the advantage of backwardness has been there for centuries. And how come China did not benefit from that potential? It was because the strategy that China adopted since the founding of the Socialist Republic in 1949. Because at the beginning of this kind of modernization attempt, China set a very ambitious target to overtake the United Kingdom in 10 years and to catch up the US in 15 years. That means that China wanted to develop the most modern, advanced, large-scale, capital-intensive industries at the beginning of this modernization drive. But we know that at the time, China was a poor agrarian economy. Capital was scarce. And so this kind of large-scale, modern, capital-intensive industries was not the competitive advantage of the Chinese economy. And as a result, firms in those kind of priority sectors were not viable in open competitive markets. And to build up that, China need to give them all kind of subsidy and protections. And this kind of subsidy and protection are always in the form of distortion to the market signals, like the repression of the interest rate and the overall value exchange rate. And with that kind of price distortion, certainly China was able to mobilize resources to build up the advanced sectors. So China was able to test the nuclear weapon in the 1960s and launch the satellite in the 1970s. But a consequence of this achievement was the distortion as a result. the allocation of resources was, transferred from sector that China has competitive advantages to sector that China did not have competitive advantages. So misallocation of resources. And also the price distortion also caused all kind of rent and rent seeking. And as a result, the economic performance was poor, and China was unable to tap into this advantage of backwardness. And only after 1979, China started to develop Chinese economy according to the competitive advantage of Chinese, economy. That is the abundant supply of available forces in China to develop labor-intensive industries, and China become very competitive in domestic market and international market. And China, with the competitiveness, China was able to, gain a large market share, accumulate capitals, and in the process of industrial upgrading, China tapped into the potential of advantage of backwardness. So the reason why China failed to do that was because of the wrong strategy adopted in the 1950s, 1960s. Then the question comes, because the strategy of trying to develop large-scale modern industry exists not only in China, in almost all the socialist countries. They all adopted the so-called Stalinist model, trying to develop the heavy industries, even though they are all poor agrarian countries. And not only in the socialist country, in effect, since the Second World War, almost all the developing countries, they wanted to develop those kind of large-scale industry after they gained political independence. And as a result, almost all of them performed very poorly in their modernization drive. And by the time that China started the transition in the 1980s, almost all other countries also started their transition, reform and opening up, not only in the socialist country, but also in the other developing countries in Africa, in Latin America, and so on. But they did not perform as well. And the evidence shows after they tried to transit from those kind of government-led growth to a market-oriented growth, their economic performance was even poorer than the economic performance in the 1960s, 1970s, measured by the average annual growth rate and the frequency of the crisis. And how come China was able to maintain stability and sustain growth, and other countries in a similar stage of transition, their economic performance was even poorer? I think it's related to the transition strategy also. Because we know that in the 1980s, when the socialist country and other developing countries started their transition, the idea at the time was Washington Consensus. And the diagnosis at the time was the reason why the developing country could not do well is because of too many government intervention, too many government failures. And the idea at the time is that if a country wanted to have a good performance, they needed to have a well-functioning market system. And so the recommendation from Washington Consensus was to remove all the distortions that created by the government in order to have a well-functioning market system. And the distortion, including the state ownership and the distortion in the prices and so on. So the recommendation was to carry out privatization, marketization, and then liberalization. But the issue is that all those kind of distortions were created for the purpose of protect the non-viable firms in the older priority sectors. If the government wants to remove all those distortions simultaneously, then all of those firms is going to go bankrupt and create huge unemployment in the urban areas. And with huge unemployment in the urban areas, certainly you do not have social stability, you cannot have the political stability, and economic growth was impossible. Not only so, because those kind of advanced industries are still considered as the backbone of their country's modernization. So in effect, even after the privatization, the government still want them to be there. And since they are not viable, so the government, are required to provide subsidies and protection continuously, and even in a more disguised term. And when this kind of disguised protection and subsidies are even less efficient than the subsidies and protection that they used to have. And many empirical evidence show after the privatization of the large-scale industry, for example in Russia, now those 8 oligopolists, they receive more subsidies from the government than it used to be. And that was the reason why the transition in most other countries follow the Washington consensus done too well. And China adopted a very pragmatic approach called the dual track approach. The dual track approach, gradual dual track approach, was on the one hand continue to provide some necessary protection and subsidies to the old large-scale steel enterprises. And on the other hand, liberalize the entry to the new sector which are consistent with China's competitive advantages and which are labor-intensive, which are competitive. And by this way, China achieves stability and dynamic economic growth simultaneously. And that is the reason for the disparity in the economic performance during the transition period in China and other socialist and non-socialist countries. Well, then what are the prices that China paid for the success of the dual track approach? I think the prices that China paid is the widespread corruption and income disparities. And the reason for that is because of the intention to retain certain protection to the oil sectors, which always has some income distribution implication. For example, the large-scale capital-intensive industries, one way to subsidize them is to have a financial depression. And as you know, China currently adopt over-concentration of the financial system in large bank and equity market. And those kind of system is designed for the intention of transfer low-cost capital to the large-scale capital-intensive firms. At the beginning, all those firms are owned by the state. Now, with 30 years of dynamic growth, certainly some private sector, they become rich, and they own those kind of large-scale capital-intensive firms. And they have the access to the financial services. And when they have access to the financial services, not only access, actually, they receive low-cost capital. And it's a form of subsidies. Who subsidize them? The small agricultural households, small and medium-sized enterprises. They put the money into the financial system, but they could not get financial services. So they are subsidizing the growth of the large-scale enterprises, and they are poorer and to subsidize the firm owned by the state or the rich people. And as a result, you can see the wealth increasingly concentrated in the large firm and also the rich people. And that is the reason why income disparity in China become larger and larger. And a similar arrangement also, exists in the resources sectors. Resources are owned by the state, but the right to mining, is limited. But the government basically did not tax anything from the mining right. So whoever can get the concession for the mining, whoever immediately becomes a billionaire. And so that's another source of income disparity. And the third one is some monopoly in the service sector, like telecommunication, banking sectors. They are monopolies, and so certainly there is some kind of monopoly rent, and that causes the income distribution to be, widening and widening. And this kind of arrangement not only contribute to the income disparities, any kind of distortion will create a rent, right? So we are going to see all kind of rent seeking, and rent seeking is an economic term that means corruption. So that is the cost that China paid. Although this kind of dual track approach maintain the stability in China, but also causing all kind of widespread corruption, rent seeking, and widening of income disparity. But I think that now it's time for China to remove those kind of distortion. One reason, if China would not, remove those kind of distortions, certainly we are going to see social discontent become, more widespread, and then people even get rich, but they are not happy. But secondly, it's also ready to do that. Because when China started the transition, as I mentioned, China was a poor agrarian economy. But now China is an upper middle income country. With per capita income of $6,100 last year. Capital is not scarce in China anymore. And many of those kind of capital intensive industry now actually are consistent with China's competitive advantages. For example, car industry. Currently, China produces 20 million cars a year, and China export about 2 million cars. If China can export cars in the global market in a competitive way, that means that China has a competitive advantage in the car industry. And also like in the equipment industries. It's capital intensive. In the past, it required protections, but now China, the equipment are competing with Germany equipment, US equipment in the global market. So that means they have competitive advantages. Since they have competitive advantages, if China continue to give them subsidy protection, it causes the social discontent and widespread the corruptions. And so it's time to remove those kind of distortions. And the Chinese government certainly understands those kind of issues very well. And so in this plenary session of the Party Congress that concluded yesterday, there's a lot of discussion and also policy to further deepening the reform and to remove the distortion and allow market to play the key role in resource allocation. And if China can remove the remaining distortions, and what are the potential for the growth in China? China already achieved 9.8% growth rate continuously for the past 34 years. And so many people predict, because historically, in history, other countries, even with very dynamic growth, like in Singapore, Korea, Japan, and so on, they only maintain about 20 years of dynamic economic growth. And after that, their growth rate dropped down to 7%, 6%, or 5%. And so there's some kind of prediction that China will also follow the pattern. But my talk indicate the driver of rapid economic growth in a developing country is the potential of the advantage of backwardness. So if we want to understand how long China can maintain this kind of dynamic economic growth, the most important thing is to see how large the advantage of backwardness is still there. And one way to measure the advantage of backwardness is to see the per capita income gap between a developing country and with a high-income country. High-income country can be represented by the US. And the newest data I have that I can use to do the comparison was 2008, estimated by Angus Madison, and he passed away in 2011. According to Angus Madison's estimation, in 2008, the per capita income in China, measured by purchasing power parities, was 21% of the US per capita income. And I think that this kind of per capita income is a very good indication of the average labor productivity in a country. And average labor productivity is an indicator of the average technological and industrial achievement in a country. So in 2008, the per capita income in China was 21% of US per capita income. And it was similar to Japan in 1951. At that time, Japan per capita income was 21% of US per capita income. Singapore in 1967, Taiwan in 1975, and Korea in 1977. And for these four East Asian economies, on the basis of 21% of US per capita income, they maintained 20 years of 9.2% growth rate in Japan, 20 years of 8.6% growth rate in Singapore, 20 years of 8.3% growth rate in Taiwan and 20 years of 7.6% growth rate in Korea. And Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore were among those 30 economies I discussed at the beginning. They tap into the potential of advantage of backwardness and accelerate their growth. And it seems that on the same basis, Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, and Korea were able to maintain 20 years of 7.6 to 9.2% growth rate. This indicates that China should have the potential to grow at around 8% for another 20 years from 2008. Because as I mentioned, the driver for sustained high growth in a country is to tap into the potential of advantage of backwardness. Certainly, its only potential is, as indicated by the Deputy Prime Minister. China needs to carry out the transition to a well-functioning market economy. China needs to, follow the competitive advantage in the process of economic development, so China can be competitive. And if China can be competitive, China will accumulate capital, both human capital and physical capital. And China can upgrade the industries. And when China upgrades its industry, China can tap into the potential of advantage of backwardness. And I think that the Party Congress decision is trying to achieve that goal. So I'm rather, optimistic about the possibility for China to maintain the dynamic economic growth in the coming decades. And lastly, we know that only a small number of countries in the world, since the Second World War, that were able to grow dynamically. The data show only 2 economies in the world so far to move from low income to middle income and then to high income. And that is Korea and Taiwan. Only 13 economies were able to move from middle income to high income. And among those 13 economies, 8 were European countries, the nearly Western European countries. So their gap was not very large to begin with. And only 5 in East Asia, including Japan, and for NIEs, they moved from the middle income to high income country. And that means what? About 180 developing countries, since the Second World War, they were trapped in low income status or middle income status, and without closing the gap with the income country. But my analysis showed, for the developing countries, if they know how to tap into the potential of advantage of backwardness, then they can accelerate their growth as the other East Asian economies were able to do. But certainly, to do that, they need to develop their economy according to their competitive advantages so they can be competitive. That's only one thing. And secondly, most developing countries, they had all kinds of distortions because of the wrong strategies adopted in the past. And so when they wanted to move away from those kind of distortion to a well-functioning market economy, I think the Chinese experiences also provide some reference. That means that they should be practical. They should find a way to maintain the social economic stability by providing necessary transition support to the old sectors. And then liberalize the entry to the new sectors so they can be competitive and stable at the same time. And the dynamic growth in the new sector will create a condition to reform the old sectors. And if they can do that, I think that they also have the opportunity to grow dynamically at 8% continuously for 1 decade, 2 decades, and to move from low income to middle income, and then even to high income status within 1 or 2 generations. So that's the lesson that I drew from my book, The Demystifying of the Chinese Economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lin. I would now like to invite Professor Tan Chin Tiong, Senior Advisor to SMU President and Professor of Marketing at the Lee Kong Chian School of Business, to To moderate the question and answer session with Professor Lim. Professor Tan, please.
Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It was indeed a fascinating story. Looking at the history of China, the reform, and what China is today, and what are some of the challenges moving forward. It is indeed a fascinating story to me. And as the moderator, I have the privilege of possibly asking the first or second questions. Well, Professor Lin, in your presentation, you make reference to the NIE economies, the Asian Four Tigers, and so on and so forth, several times. And they have been able to sustain 20 years of rapid economic growth, and China had done it even more impressively for 34 years. However, China had done it within the whole notions of a very stable political, central, socialistic regime, while the four Asian tigers have a very different political system. We have popular votes. When economies reach a certain level of medium to high income economies, the populace, the constituents, the people typically would want to have a view, a say in how the country ought to be run. And the four Asian tigers all have the popular vote system. Do you think it will come a day when China will move into a more democracy kind of regime?
Well, certainly every country needs to continue reform its political system in order to meet the demand of the people. And this is a necessity not only in China. I think it's a necessity in any country in the world, including high-income countries today. But if we look into the high-income country today, yes, they have something in common, but they also have a difference. I think the political system in UK is different from the political system in Germany, indeed. And the political system in Germany is different from the political system in China, in France. And so that means that yes, China will reform and to meet the demand of the people. But China will have its own characteristics. Just like any country, their political system has their own characteristics.
Well, and if you look at the way the social space in China had been managed, I mean, just using my own personal example, when I was in Shanghai recently, my friend sent me a clip on YouTube. I tried it in the hotel, nothing happened. I tried to use Twitter, nothing happened. I used Facebook, nothing happened. I say, wow, well, Shanghai looks like a modern, ultra-modern city. And many of the things that all of us are so accustomed to, you can't get in China. Will that create some social discontent?
First, certainly we don't want to open China for the surveillance by the US. And although we do not have Twitter, but we have Weibo.
So you don't think the young people of China will be anxiously wanting some of this Western social media platform?
We have the China social media platform.
Okay, point taken. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have much time, so I would like to open the floor to questions from some of you. Please, can we have the first question? Now, this is a very hot topic. I would envisage many of you will have all kinds of interesting questions.
Professor Justin, it's a fascinating talk. I learned a lot. My name is Hian, I'm a venture capitalist. I want to ask a very specific question, which is that your comparison of the growth rates, the theory is that China is going to do another 8% in 20 years, that's the hope. And you compare that to what Singapore has done, Japan has done, Korea has done. We are not that big economies, and a large proportion of that, I argue, is actually export driven, right? You can put capital into a country like Singapore and then we can export. The demand came from overseas. And to a certain extent, since the 1980s, China has benefited from high growth using this export strategy. And a lot of people are now saying that China is transitioning to something more of an internally driven demand, similar to what the United States did from the 19th century, 20th century, around the time of J.P. Morgan and Thomas Edison. Where is the demand going to come for this 20 years of 2% growth for China if China cannot depend on the export engine, which is what Singapore and the NIEs depended on over the past 20 years? Thank you.
Very good question. I think what contributes to growth is not export itself. What contributes to growth is net export. And the net export actually is very small as a percentage of Chinese GDP. So its contribution to the growth actually is not that large. That's one thing. And then secondly, when China increased the export, China also increased the import. So China created a market for other countries. And so as a result, it's almost balanced. So I don't think that it's a pessimism that we need to factor in, because theoretically, net export is one of the main contributions to the growth. And the net export is always very small, not only in China, but also in other countries.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Prof. Lin. I'm Rika from SMU. So nice to meet you. We all know that in the third plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee, a framework or a guide about the comprehensive on the deeper reform out. But I think it's still very generic, or it does not really touch many details. For example, the regulation or the implementations. Can you share with us your opinions about the house property tax or the real estate tax problem in China？可以跟我们分享一下你对中国房产税的一些看法吗 ？Thank you.
Well, I think certainly it has been discussed, and when it will be implemented, we can wait and see. And it's desirable, and certainly we need to consider, if you impose on property tax, then the incentive to own the property will be reduced. And but China is still on the early stage of urbanization, and it's also important to make it possible for people to own their housing and so on. So by the end, any kind of policy changes need to consider its benefit and its drawbacks, and at the end, the decision will make based on this kind of considerations.
Okay, next question.
Professor Lin, thank you for your talk. I'm Chiu Soon Kik from Credit Suisse, Singapore. I have a question related to the growth potential of China going further ahead. And you mentioned the comparative advantage of backwardness. And our DPM also mentioned that he was optimistic about the growth potential. But he highlighted two risks. One, which is the excess capacity with inflation pressures arising from the credit boom since 2009. And secondly, the interdependence of the reform process. So would you agree that these are the two key risks going ahead, and would you see any additional risks in terms of reaching that growth potential and dealing with the short-term pain before getting there to that long-term potential?
Well, I mentioned a little bit. It's very important to maintain social stability. And so if income the distribution become too, widespread, then people are not going to be happy. And so it's very important to carry out the necessary reform to reduce income disparities. And there are two ways to deal with those kind of tensions. One way is to do some transfer, to tax the rich people, and then to do the transfer to tax the low-income people. But more important thing for me is to remove the rules of the income disparity. And as I mentioned, the rules of the income disparities is the resources in the financial sector, in the resource sectors, and in the monopoly. So if the Chinese government will carry out the reform recommendations as discussed in the third plenary session, I think the rules of the income disparity can be removed. That's one thing. And secondly, regarding the excess capacity in the current system, I think that you need to recognize China is a middle-income country. Even China has excess capacity in many sectors now, China still has opportunity to upgrade the industry and to make more investment. And this is something, difference between a high-income country and a middle-income country. When a high-income country like the US, whenever it has the excess capacity in the existing sectors, it's very hard to find a new sector to make investment. But for a developing country, you always have opportunity to make a new investment because you can do the industrial upgrading. And if you do the industrial upgrading, you will create a demand for the output of the existing sectors, and it can mitigate the excess capacity. So as long as China can maintain this kind of growth, as I predict, I think the excess capacity will not be a main threat to the sustainability of the growth in China.
Next question.
Anne Clarini, Professor of Public Policy here at SMU. I'm in the back. I very much hope that the optimistic message that we are hearing now about China, it turns out to be correct, because I think there's nothing worse for the world than the prospect of a China that does not succeed. But I think there are concerns that I haven't heard addressed now about China's prospects in a world that is very, very different from the world in which any previous large country has had to try to succeed. And I'm referring particularly to what's increasingly being called the food, energy, water nexus, the resource constraints that are so much more pressing than they have ever been in the history of humanity. There are credible estimates out now that 40% of the world's topsoil is degraded and is not being fixed. There is an article in the Singapore press today about the extreme water crisis that China is facing. The entire history of economic development that you so eloquently traced has entirely depended on rapid utilization of fossil fuels, which is having consequences that are rapidly heading us toward tipping points that civilization cannot withstand. I'm very curious, when you are looking at the future of China's economic growth, what the percentages that you were talking about, how those stack up against the estimates of the negative impact on China's GDP, of the environmental consequences of that pattern of growth, what your estimate is of essentially the net positive economic growth that China has been undergoing compared to those environmental damages, and to what degree those constraints are posing existential threats to China's economic future.
Well, I think the similar, concern has been raised in the human history, for centuries. Malthus was the first person to mention about, the constraint of the environment, the food supply, and for the population for the growth. And the newest one, like in the 1960s, the Roman Clark published a book called The Limit to Growth. And if you base on that book, by the time of 2000, all the resources in the world has been running out of, but we continue to grow. I think that this is something we need to pay attention to. But at the same time, I don't think we need to be so pessimistic, because technology can provide a solution. And the reason why technology can provide a solution is because if you have some kind of shortages, the price for those kind of factors will increase. And that will infuse the innovation in those kind of sectors. And it will also encourage people to save the use of those kind of resources. And by these two forces, I think that most of the constraints can be mitigate and removed. And similarly, the issue discussed, yes, those are the issues. But because they are issues, then we will find a solution to address them.
One last question.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm a year one student from SMU, and now China is expected to undergo a new economic reform now. And as we all know, that the deeper the reform can go, but the more vested interest it can touch, and to the extent that the reformers of the economy may be affected badly. And so my question is, in your opinion, how far this reform can go, and what possible impact it can bring to China's economy? Thank you.
Well, again, good question. I would say vested interest group has been there always. Even when China started the transition from a planned economy to a market economy, at that time, there were all different kinds of vested interest groups. One was, the heavy industries. They were the dominant industry at that time. And the other one was communal system. You have all kinds of countries. They are like local entities. And they are vested interest groups. But any government has some degree of freedom to make changes. And if they are convinced the change is good for the nation, and they will have, they can find a way to address those kind of issues. So if you look into that way, I'm not pessimistic because that's the reason why we need to have a party congress to make a decision about the direction of changes. And once they make the direction of changes, people will be convinced it's better to make the changes than not to make the changes. So that's the way the progress has been made in China. And I'm sure the similar analysis can be applied to other countries because Western interest group there. But as Keynes said in the last sentence of his the general theory, he say, for good or bad, what matters is not Western interest group. What matters is ideas. If you have the right ideas to make the analysis about what is good, what is bad, then any political system can make changes.
Well, it's very interesting. Very early in Professor Lin's career, he forecasted that Chinese will go through long period of high growth. And he was spot on. Today, he forecasted to us that in the next 20 years, China will continue to have fast growth economy for the next 20 years. And I'm an optimist myself, and I'm really pleased with your prediction because at dinner I was asking him, can you give me a prediction of Chinese economy? And he said, I'll keep it for tomorrow. And what he did. And I'm indeed very pleased to hear that China is going to be continuing with its growth pattern for the next 20 years. And I guess the concept of leveraging on the advantage of backwardness is a very interesting concept. And while one day China will no longer have that backward advantage, but by then new ideas will come into the picture, new technology will come into the picture, which is exactly what Singapore is doing currently. Because we don't have that advantage of backwardness, and we need new technology, new productivity, and new ideas. And I'm sure China, after the 20 years of growth, will have yet another 20 years of growth based on technology and new ideas. Thank you so much for your wonderful story.
Thank you for being here with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a tea break now and we'll see all of you back here.